Hello everyone, this is Tyler, and today I'll be showing you the correct way to change the oil on your dirt bike. The bike I'll be changing the oil on is a Honda CRF250R, and the oil change process will be similar for most bikes, but there are some things that are specific to this model. So the first thing we're going to do to this bike is let it run for 3 minutes and then let it sit for 3 minutes before we change the oil. Now that the bike has ran for a few minutes, here are the things we'll need to do the oil change. The oil I'll be using to do this oil change is Maxima Premium 410W40. Make sure when picking out oil for your motorcycle that it meets the requirements listed in your owner's manual, but also depending on whether you have a wet or dry clutch, you might need different oils. On this oil change, I'll be replacing the oil filter. Not all motorcycles have oil filters, but if it does, make sure you replace it as scheduled in the owner's manual. On this bike, I like to replace the oil filter at least every other oil change. To change the oil on this bike, you'll need a 12mm socket and a 5/16 wrench or socket. Some other things you should consider getting for this oil change is an oil pan. You want to make sure you collect the oil that comes out of the bike and dispose of it properly. In addition to the oil pan, a funnel makes the job of filling the bike with oil a lot easier and keeps you from spilling oil all over the place. And lastly, a rag to clean up and a can of Arnold Palmer makes this job a lot easier. I'm not sponsored, but that'd be great if I was. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do before we drain the oil is find level ground to put the bike on. We want to make sure the bike is straight up and down. That way oil doesn't sit to either end of the oil pan, so it all just drains out of the drain plug. So what we're going to do before we open up the drain plug is put our pan underneath the bike. If you have a pan like this, which I do recommend because it just holds all the oil inside of the pan and you can drain it later, make sure you do open up the breather hole and also open up this cap here so that all the oil does drain into the container. Next, we're going to use our 12mm socket to open up the drain plug that is underneath the bike right here. Your bike should have a washer on the drain plug, so make sure to keep track of that when you are taking the bolt off. And in my case, the washer that helps seal the bolt stayed onto the crankcase. But if yours gets all mangled up or begins to replace, I would recommend replacing this washer. As the dripping oil slows, we are going to kick the bike 5 times while holding the kill switch so it doesn't start. That'll help drain excess oil inside of the crankcase and inside of other parts within the engine. After the oil has completely drained, we are ready to change the oil filter. On this bike, the oil filter is located right here, and oftentimes people recommend removing this, which sometimes you can do, but in my case, I'm just going to bend it out of the way enough for me to slide the components out. Something to keep track of when you're changing your oil filter is sometimes these bolts are different length. So in my case, this bolt on the top is longer than the bolt I'll be coming out of the bottom. Move your oil pan underneath the oil filter so if any oil drains, your oil pan catches it. When removing the oil filter, keep track of the order that the parts come out in. You should have your oil filter followed by a spring, which is in the back. It should look like this. Also, while changing your oil filter, Take a look at the condition of the O-ring around here. Make sure it's got no tears or cuts, so that way it seals properly. I'm just going to wipe out the inside of the oil filter hole here in case we have any debris left inside. After removing the old filter, grab your new filter, compare it to the old filter, and make sure they're the same. Make sure there's O-rings in the right places and the material has the same count to it. And then grab your spring and your cap. And on this bike, you want to make sure that this oil filter, the O-ring here, seals into the back of the cap like this. And also you want to make sure that the cap goes back in the right direction. So the canals running through the cap line up with the canals on the case. These bolts do not need to be super tight. The O-ring on the cap does the sealing. Now that the oil is drained and the filter has been changed, you're ready to reinstall the drain bolt back into the case. Make sure before you torque down the drain bolt that you add on the washer to help seal it. And the torque for this bolt is 16 foot-pounds, which is right just over hand tight. Just snug it up nice, but don't over tighten it. After the oil filter and drain bolt have been reinstalled, we are ready to add the engine oil. The engine oil fill on this bike is right here on the front of the crankcase. The recommended oil capacity on this bike after changing the oil is 0.7 US quarts. If you choose to change the oil in the filter, it is 0.73. If you need to use liters, for the oil change, it is 0.66 liters, and for the oil and filter, it is 0.69 liters. Some motorcycles have a viewing window on the side of the crankcase to see whether you have added the correct amount of oil. It is important to check with your model whether the oil should be at the middle of the window or the top of the window. Also, you should check if you have a dipstick, if the dipstick should be screwed in all the way or unscrewed and just pushed in to see if you have the correct amount of oil in your crankcase. If you don't do that, you could add the incorrect amount of oil and damage your engine. You can find this information in your bike's handbook. For the 2006 CRF250R, we can see here that you must insert the engine oil filler cap / dipstick without screwing it in to check the oil level. After adding the correct amount of oil, run your bike for a few minutes and then let it sit for a few minutes. This will let the oil throughout the engine settle to the bottom of the case, and then you can check again to verify that you have added the correct amount of oil. Congratulations, you have just correctly changed the engine oil on your bike. I will link all the products used in this video in the description, and thank you for watching. If you found this video useful, make sure you like and subscribe and tell your friends.